Right now in the NBA, we're seeing two teams, the Miami Heat and the Denver Nuggets, battling it out in the NBA Finals. The sheer dominance we're seeing from Jimmy Butler and Nikola Jokic this postseason is absurd. They're going through countless talented teams and players just to get to this point. Throughout NBA history, we've seen quite the same. We've seen legends of the game step up in the postseason, beating countless great teams in order to win a championship. But there's one player that's had to go through slightly more trouble, a little bit more adversity in his way to achieve his rings than any other player. And today, we're gonna find out that exact player. Today we're going to find the NBA legend that's played against the hardest playoff competition in modern NBA history. We're going to be using 7 greats of the game over the last 45 years or so no Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain, unfortunately. The 7 legends we're going to use are Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Steph Curry. From modern NBA history, these 7 players have stood out amongst the crowd of NBA talent. Their legacies are just on another level compared to the rest. I mean, these 7 players combined hold about 75% of all rings won from 1980 to 2023. So it only makes sense. Like we mentioned, we're going to be comparing these 7 players against each other to find out who played against the hardest playoff competition. We're going to do this through many, and I stress the many, different stats, metrics, charts, and figures. We're going to take a deep dive into the reality of the situation. We're going to dive deeper than most people would ever think to go. There's so much necessary information and context to expose, and exposing it is what we're going to do. The first insightful and telling chart we're going to look at shows the degree of difficulty of each playoff run from 1980 to 2023 using SRS scores. SRS is going to be a very common metric used in this video. SRS is a stat that gives a team a set value based on their margin of victory and strength of schedule. The higher the score is, the better the team is, and vice versa. This chart right here shows truly how hard each championship was. This is done by adding up the SRS scores from each team the champion beat in the playoffs. So for example, the 2016 Cleveland Cavs beat the Pistons, the Hawks, the Raptors, and the Warriors, giving them a combined score of 18.38. Right here in teal, we have Magic Johnson's 5 rings. As we can see, these playoff runs are relatively weak compared to the rest of the playoff runs in NBA history. In green, we have Larry Bird's 3 championships. These rings right here are a little bit stronger than Magic's, but it's nothing too impressive. Next in red, we have Michael Jordan's 6 rings. For reference, the average score for a championship playoff run is 13.9. MJ's last 4 rings would be considered above average and even pretty challenging compared to the average. Now we're starting to get somewhere with his rings. Next in gray, we have Tim Duncan, who had a few tough runs in his day. He also managed to snag a relatively easy ring in 1999 in one of the most competitive times in the league. Next in purple, we have Kobe's 5 rings. Kobe's path to a championship during his three-peat with Shaq was much more challenging than his last 2 rings. In green, once again, we have LeBron's 4 rings. Besides his obvious 2016 ring, there isn't a lot that stands out to you here. And finally, in teal again, we have Steph Curry's rings, which are pretty average besides the one last year. The player that holds the most difficult championship run right here, with a score of 23.96, is Hakeem Olajuwon, whose Rockets were a 6th seed. Anyways, this really shows that all rings aren't built the same. Getting a ring around this time frame was a lot harder than getting a ring around this, or especially this time frame. Based off this graph, Kobe and MJ easily have the best collection of rings, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to unpack. Every NBA player's path to a championship is different. Some players may play against easy conference competition, but harder finals. With others, it's the opposite way around. Some players catch a break with only weaker teams, and others may not get the same luxury. Kobe Bryant by far played against the hardest conference competition per team, with almost a whole point lead against the next closest guy. Teams like the Jazz, the Kings, the Suns, the Spurs weren't just a walk in the park. Speaking of the Spurs, Tim Duncan is 2nd place, playing against Kobe and many similar teams. MJ, to my surprise, came in at 3rd place and not higher. Curry came in at 4th. LeBron barely edged out Bird for 5th place. I really think this gives context to LeBron's 10 finals appearances. It was pretty much a cakewalk cakewalk for LeBron in the East. There's a specific reason why Magic and Bird both place so low in this chart. In the 80s, the NBA was still expanding new teams, so many of Magic and Bird's first and even second round competition was below average teams. There weren't enough teams to give them consistent competition throughout conference play. Now let's take a look at the opposite of this, finals competition, specifically years in which these players won a ring. So teams they actually beat in the finals. In this graph, the x-axis represents seasons in the league. Dots towards the left means a player was younger, and dots towards the right means a player was older. Going in chronological order, let's start off with Magic Johnson. He got a taste of victory very early in his NBA career. Magic Johnson, in the span of 3 years, won a state championship for his high school, an NCAA national championship, and an NBA championship. Not bad. Magic's finals competition was pretty good. Next, we have Larry Bird's finals comp, which was not strong comparatively, which is kind of a rip on the Lakers because these two teams played against each other in the finals all the time. Next, we have Michael Jordan's finals comp, which is noticeably harder than the other two players. Tim Duncan's finals comp is relatively weak comparatively. Mind you, the average is 4.97. Kobe's finals competition was also pretty weak, besides the 09 Orlando Magic. Next, we have LeBron James, who possesses easily the most impressive and challenging finals series ever won. Of course, in 2016 when he beat the Warriors with an SRS score of 10.38. LeBron beat some pretty good teams in the finals. And finally, Steph Curry, who hasn't had the most challenging finals comp. Based off these numbers, Michael Jordan beat the best teams in the finals on average, with LeBron being a close second. Magic Johnson was third, followed by Kobe, Curry, Duncan, and Bird at a far last place. But what about finals competition in general, with or without a victory at the end? The dark blue columns represent general finals comp, and the teal columns represent finals competition that they beat. As we can see, LeBron has the hardest general finals competition of the 7 players. Playing against the Splash Brother Warriors for 4 straight years isn't an easy task. Despite what many people like to say about MJ's finals competition, that it was weak, this couldn't be further from the truth. Johnson, Bryant, and Bird follow these two. Now, with factoring in all of these previous stats, charts, and metrics, we can find an answer to who played against the hardest playoff competition in total throughout their whole career on average. And this would be none other than Kobe Bryant, who actually has a pretty sizable lead against the rest of the competition. Because the majority of playoff series are played against interconference opponents, there's a heavy correlation between conference competition and total competition. MJ is second place, followed by Duncan, Curry, LeBron, Bird, and Johnson. The mid to late 90s to the mid 2000s was easily the most competitive time for the NBA, and it's evident with our top 3 players that all came from that era. So, does this answer our question then? Are we done with our quest of knowledge? Well, not quite yet. There's still a little bit more to uncover. To really find which player had the hardest route, the player that really had to put in more effort and energy than any other player to win his championships, we need to divert our attention somewhere else. I present you the stat called contributions. This is found by dividing the player's win shares by the amount of wins his team has. And in our case, we're going to be looking at purely playoff wins and playoff win shares. The higher a player's contributions are, that obviously means more of his effort was required to win a championship. Once again, we're going to go in chronological order. We see Magic and Bird's contributions towards their rings. As we can see, Larry Bird contributes more to his rings than Johnson did. Larry Bird in the 1984 postseason contributed almost 32% towards winning a championship. Michael Jordan gave his Bulls even more than Larry or Magic gave their teams. Next, we see Tim Duncan in red and Kobe in purple. Duncan in 03 gave his Spurs an ungodly 37% contribution towards that chip. Kobe's contributions were significantly lower during his three-peat because he wasn't even the best player on his team. That team was led by Shaq. But later on, Kobe proved that he could lead a team to not 1, but 2 championships. And finally, we see LeBron in gray and Curry in blue. LeBron obviously gave more to his teams than Curry did. LeBron didn't have the same type of firepower that Curry did around him. LeBron was forced to contribute more to win. Curry didn't have to. Based off these numbers, LeBron James actually has the highest average contribution per ring. LeBron, on average, contributed an insane 31.3% for each ring. MJ follows him at a hair under 30%, followed by Bird, Duncan, Johnson, Bryant, and Steph Curry. As we mentioned before, not all rings are equal. Some rings are far more easy or difficult to achieve. Now, I believe one of the most telling and insightful metrics of this video is the value of ring stat. This is found by multiplying the average contribution per ring by the amount of championships the player has won. And there's one player that truly dominates this criteria. Michael Jordan's collection of rings is by far the most valuable, prized, and superior set of championships ever achieved. Now, despite having less rings than Kobe, Duncan, or Magic, LeBron's set of rings is the second most valuable of any player. And despite having 4 rings, more than Bird, and as many as LeBron, Curry's rings just don't hold as much weight. They were easier to achieve with less of a path of resistance. For context, this compares the value of each player's rings compared to the actual amount of rings they have. Not all championships are built the same, and I think this proves that. So, what's the answer to our original question? Well, I don't think there's one definitive answer. There's multiple ways to answer this. If you're looking strictly at numbers, who played on average the hardest competition based off SRS scores? Well, then your answer would be Kobe Bryant. If you're looking at it based off who had some of the hardest championship playoff runs, I think your answer would be a toss-up between Kobe and Mike. If you're looking at it based off of the highest stage in all of basketball, the NBA Finals, well, it would be neck and neck between LeBron and Jordan. If you're looking at it based off who had to put in the greatest input to get the most rewarding output, who had to grind it out to see the fruits of their labors, well, I think you'd have a pretty clear answer. Despite all this, I can confidently say that it's not Duncan, Magic, Bird, or Curry. There's no argument or metric that even points close to their way. It's between Mike, Kobe, and Bron. But I think the way you look at playoff competition and degree of difficulty will determine your own personal answer.